Rain drummed against the windows of Daisy's diner as Ellie wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The breakfast rush had come and gone, leaving behind sticky maple syrup residue and coffee rings that seemed determined to become permanent fixtures. Her fingers were red and chapped from the harsh cleaning solution, but she scrubbed on, ignoring the ache in her lower back that had become a constant companion during her double shifts. "Order up for table 7. Hank, the cook, bellowed from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates of steaming pancakes onto the counter. Ellie tucked a wayward strand of auburn hair behind her ear and hoisted the plates, making her way through the maze of tables to a corner booth where an elderly couple sat holding hands across the table. They had been coming in every Tuesday for as long as she had worked at the diner, always ordering the same thing, always sitting in the same booth, and always leaving her a $5 tip folded into the shape of a crane. "Here you go, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," she said, setting the plates down with practiced ease. "Extra blueberries, just how you like them." Mrs. Peterson reached out and patted Ellie's arm with a papery hand. "Thank you, dear. And how is your grandmother doing? Any better?" Ellie's smile faltered for just a moment before she forced it back into place. "She's hanging in there. The doctors say she's stable, but—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden the kind couple with her worries. "But you're worried about her 80th birthday coming up next month," Mrs. Peterson finished for her, eyes soft with understanding. "You know, when my Harold was in the hospital a few years back, the doctor said having something to look forward to did wonders for his recovery." Ellie nodded, thinking of her grandmother's most fervent wish. For years, all she had talked about was seeing Ellie walk down the aisle before she died. "I know. I just wish I could give her what she wants most." "You'll find someone, dear," Mrs. Peterson assured her, squeezing her arm. "A heart as kind as yours won't stay alone forever." As Ellie made her way back to the counter, the bell above the door chimed, and a gust of cold air swept in along with a man she had seen numerous times before. He wasn't a customer, at least not in the traditional sense. Tall and lean, with a beard that hadn't seen scissors in months and clothes that had seen better days, he would come in occasionally when the weather was particularly harsh. Hank would grumble, but allow Ellie to slip him a cup of coffee and sometimes leftover pie that would otherwise be thrown out. Today, he looked particularly bedraggled, rainwater dripping from his dark hair onto shoulders that hunched against the cold. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something dignified about the way he carried himself, something in his gray-blue eyes that spoke of a person who had once been someone else entirely. Ellie poured a cup of coffee without being asked and set it on the counter as he took a seat on a stool near the door. "On the house," she said quietly, sliding it toward him. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face, before a small, grateful smile curved his lips. "Thank you," he said, his voice deeper and more refined than one might expect. "You're very kind." "It's just coffee," she replied with a shrug, though they both knew it was more than that. It was acknowledgement, recognition of his humanity when so many chose to look right through him as if he were invisible. "I'm Ellie," she offered, extending her hand across the counter. He hesitated for a moment before taking it in his own, rough from exposure, but with long, elegant fingers. "Jack," he said simply. "Jack Donovan." And with that simple exchange of names, the course of both their lives would change in ways neither could have possibly imagined. Over the next few weeks, Jack became a regular fixture at the diner. He would come in during the slow afternoon hours, quietly taking the same stool at the counter. Ellie learned that he had a sweet tooth that favored apple pie over cherry, that he took his coffee black, but would occasionally indulge in hot chocolate topped with whipped cream on particularly cold days, and that behind his reserved demeanor was a man of surprising wit and intelligence. What she didn't learn was how he had ended up on the streets. Whenever the conversation veered too close to his past, Jack would skillfully redirect, asking about her day or commenting on the weather. Ellie respected his privacy, recognizing the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes as similar to the ones she saw in her own mirror, the kind that came from loss too deep to casually discuss. "My grandmother's birthday is next weekend," Ellie mentioned one rainy afternoon as she refilled Jack's coffee cup. She's turning 80. Jack's face brightened with genuine interest. That's quite a milestone. You must be close to her. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 10, Ellie explained, leaning against the counter. The diner was empty save for a businessman typing furiously on his laptop in the far corner. She's in the hospital now. Heart problems. The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. Jack's expression softened with empathy. I'm sorry to hear that. What did you get her for her birthday? Ellie bit her lip, fidgeting with the coffee pot. That's the thing. What she wants most, I can't exactly gift wrap. At Jack's questioning look, she continued, all she's ever wanted is to see me married. She's old-fashioned that way. Believes a woman isn't complete without a partner to share her life with. And you don't agree? Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. It's not that, Ellie said, sighing. I'd love to find the right person someday. But Grandma talks about it like it's her dying wish. And She gestured vaguely at herself, at the diner, at her life. I'm not exactly drowning in romantic prospects. Jack took a thoughtful sip of his coffee. Have you considered hiring someone? An actor, perhaps? Ellie laughed incredulously. To pretend to be my husband? That's crazy. Is it? Jack set down his cup, his expression surprisingly serious. People do crazier things for the ones they love. Besides, it would just be for a day. To give your grandmother peace. I couldn't ask anyone to do that, Ellie protested, though the seed of the idea had already taken root. Jack's eyes held hers steadily. You could ask me. The coffee pot nearly slipped from Ellie's fingers. You? Why not? I clean up reasonably well, he said with a self-deprecating smile. And I've got nothing but time on my hands. Ellie stared at him, stunned by the offer. Jack, I can't let you do that. You wouldn't be letting me do anything, he countered. I'm offering. As a friend. He paused, looking down at his hands. You've shown me kindness when most people can't even bring themselves to look at me. Let me return the favor. The proposal was absurd, irrational, potentially disastrous. And yet, as Ellie looked into Jack's earnest eyes, she found herself considering it. What harm could it really do? A single day of pretense to bring joy to her grandmother's final days. You would really do that for me? She asked quietly. Jack nodded, a gentle smile playing at his lips. For you, Ellie, yes. And so, with that simple exchange in a near-empty diner on a rainy afternoon, a plan was set in motion that would lead them down a path neither had anticipated. 3 days before her grandmother's birthday, Ellie found Jack waiting for her outside the diner after her shift ended. He looked different. His beard had been neatly trimmed, his hair cut and combed, and though his clothes were still worn, they were clean and pressed. I thought we should get our stories straight, he explained as they walked together through the park, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. If we're going to convince your grandmother that we're married, we need to at least know the basics about each other. Over cups of hot chocolate from a street vendor, they crafted their fictional romance. They decided they had met at the diner. True enough, dated for 8 months, and married in a small civil ceremony just 2 weeks prior. Jack suggested they claimed they were saving for a proper wedding celebration in the spring, which explained the lack of photographs or rings. What about you? Ellie asked as evening shadows lengthened across the grass. What should I know about my husband? Jack hesitated, something flickering in his eyes before he answered. I studied engineering in college. I'm good with numbers and building things. I like classic rock music and can't stand cilantro. I'm allergic to cats, but love dogs. He paused, then added softly, most of that is actually true. And the rest? Ellie prompted gently. Jack's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The rest isn't important for this story. Ellie wanted to press further but respected the boundaries he was clearly establishing. Instead, she shared her own truths. Her love of painting, though she rarely found time for it anymore. Her dream of opening a small bakery someday. her collection of vintage postcards inherited from her grandmother. As night fell and they parted ways, Ellie found herself wondering what exactly she had gotten herself into. She was planning to introduce a homeless man she barely knew as her husband to her dying grandmother. By any rational measure, this was madness. And yet, as she fell asleep that night, it wasn't doubt that filled her mind, but the memory of Jack's smile when he had trimmed his beard, revealing a face far younger and more handsome than she had initially realized, and the strange flutter in her chest that had accompanied it. The morning of her grandmother's birthday dawned clear and crisp, autumn sunlight filtering through the changing leaves outside the hospital window. Ellie arrived early, decorating the small private room with balloons and flowers, arranging a modest cake on the bedside table, and nervously checking her watch every few minutes. When Jack appeared in the doorway, Ellie nearly didn't recognize him. Gone was any trace of the man who frequented her diner. Instead, he stood tall and confident in a well-fitted suit, his hair neatly styled, clean-shaven except for a precisely trimmed goatee that accentuated his strong jawline. In his hands was a bouquet of pink roses. "You look." Ellie struggled to find words that wouldn't betray how her heart had suddenly begun racing. "Presentable," Jack suggested with a hint of amusement. "Beautiful," she corrected before she could stop herself, then blushed furiously. "I mean, you clean up nicely." A smile played at the corners of his mouth as he stepped into the room, lowering his voice. "Where did you get that suit? It looks expensive." "A kind donation," he replied cryptically. "Are you ready to introduce me to my grandmother-in-law?" Before Ellie could respond, a weak voice called from the bed. "Ellie, is someone there with you?" Ellie's grandmother, Margaret Wilson, lay propped against several pillows, her once vibrant face now pale and lined with age and illness. But her eyes remained sharp as ever, taking in both Ellie and the stranger at her side with keen interest. "Grandma," Ellie said, moving to take her hand, heart pounding with nerves. "I have someone special I want you to meet. This is Jack, my husband." The joy that illuminated her grandmother's face was worth whatever consequences this deception might bring. "Your husband," she repeated, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Ellie, you got married and didn't tell me." "It was very recent," Jack interjected smoothly, stepping forward to present the roses and take Margaret's frail hand in his. "Just a small civil ceremony 2 weeks ago. We're planning something more formal in the spring and hoping very much that you'll be there to see it." Margaret searched his face intently, and Ellie held her breath, certain that her grandmother would see through their charade immediately. Instead, Margaret's face softened. "You look at my granddaughter the way a man should look at his wife," she declared. "Come, sit and tell me everything. How you met, when you fell in love. I want to hear it all." For the next hour, Ellie watched in amazement as Jack charmed her grandmother with the story they had fabricated, embellishing it with small details they hadn't even discussed, but that somehow fit perfectly. He described their first date at an art museum, knowing Ellie's love of painting, spoke of how he had been drawn to her kindness and her laugh, and even produced a simple silver band from his pocket that he claimed they were using temporarily until they could afford something better. When he slipped it onto Ellie's finger, their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Ellie almost believed the fiction herself. "You've made an old woman very happy," Margaret said finally, reaching for both their hands. "Seeing my Ellie with someone who clearly adores her, I couldn't ask for a better birthday gift." Jack squeezed Margaret's hand gently. "The honor is mine. Your granddaughter is an extraordinary woman." The sincerity in his voice caught Ellie off guard, and when she looked at him, the tenderness in his expression made her wonder how much of this was still pretend. After cake and more conversation, Margaret began to tire, and a nurse came to suggest they let her rest. As they prepared to leave, Margaret beckoned Ellie closer. "He's a good man," she whispered. "I can tell. Don't let him go." Guilt twisted in Ellie's stomach as she kissed her grandmother's cheek. "I won't, Grandma. I promise." Outside in the hospital corridor, the weight of their deception settled over Ellie. "Thank you," she said softly as they walked toward the elevators. "You were amazing in there. I don't know how to repay you." Jack shook his head. Seeing her happiness was payment enough. He hesitated, then added, "Though I wouldn't say no to a slice of that apple pie you've been hiding from the other customers." Ellie laughed, relieved by the break in tension. "Deal." As they stepped into the elevator, Jack's hand brushed against hers. Whether by accident or design, she couldn't tell, and Ellie found herself wishing, for just a moment, that the silver ring on her finger meant something real. 3 days later, Ellie's world collapsed when she received a call that Margaret had suffered a massive heart attack. By the time she reached the hospital, her grandmother was gone. The funeral was small, just Ellie, a few of her grandmother's friends from church, and to her surprise, Jack, who appeared at the back of the chapel in the same suit he had worn to the hospital. He stayed at a respectful distance throughout the service, but when everyone else had left the cemetery, he approached Ellie as she stood by the fresh grave. Without a word, he simply stood beside her, offering silent companionship that somehow meant more than any words of sympathy others had expressed. When she finally broke down, the tears she had been holding back all day pouring forth, Jack's arms enfolded her, strong and steady. "She died happy," he murmured into her hair, believing her granddaughter had found love. "You gave her that." Ellie clung to him, finding unexpected comfort in the embrace of this man who was both familiar and a mystery. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered, immediately clarifying. "Not like that. I just don't want to be alone." Jack hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course." That night, they sat side by side on Ellie's small couch in her apartment above the diner, drinking tea and sharing stories about the people they had lost. Jack spoke of his parents, both gone now, though he remained vague about when or how. Ellie recounted childhood memories of Margaret, of learning to bake in her kitchen, of being tucked into bed with stories of princesses who saved themselves. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Ellie fell asleep with her head on Jack's shoulder. She woke hours later to find herself carefully tucked into her bed, a blanket drawn over her. On the nightstand was a note in elegant handwriting. "Thank you for trusting me with your grandmother's happiness. I'm sorry for your loss." Ellie searched for Jack over the following days, but he didn't return to the diner. His absence left a void that surprised her with its depth, making her realize how much she had come to look forward to their brief interactions. She found herself missing not only his company, but the possibility of what might have developed between them given time. 2 weeks after the funeral, as Ellie was closing up the diner, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see a woman in an expensive suit, her salt and pepper hair cut in a sleek bob. "I'm afraid we're closed," Ellie said, continuing to stack chairs on tables. "I'm looking for Eleanor Wilson," the woman said, remaining in the doorway. Ellie paused, wary. "That's me. Who's asking?" "My name is Victoria Hargrove. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Jackson Donovan." The woman opened her briefcase and withdrew a business card, extending it toward Ellie. "I've been trying to locate you for several days." Ellie's heart skipped a beat at the familiar name. Jack? Did something happen to him? She took the card automatically, fear closing her throat. Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Donovan is fine, physically speaking, but he asked me to find you and bring you to him. He said it was time you knew the truth." The car Victoria ushered her into was a sleek black luxury sedan with tinted windows and butter-soft leather seats. As they drove out of Ellie's neighborhood and into increasingly affluent areas of the city, confusion and apprehension battled within her. "Where are we going?" she finally asked as they passed through wrought iron gates and up a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured trees. "Donovan Estate," Victoria replied simply, as if that explained everything. The house, or rather, mansion, that came into view nearly stopped Ellie's heart. 3 stories of elegant stone and expansive windows spread before them, the architectural equivalent of old money and refined taste. There must be some mistake, Ellie said weakly as the car came to a stop in the circular driveway. Jack is. She trailed off, unsure how to describe the man she knew. Victoria's expression remained neutral as she opened the car door. Mr. Donovan will explain everything. Ellie followed the attorney into a soaring entryway with marble floors and a crystal chandelier that cast prisms of light across the walls. Victoria led her through to a library, where floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls and a fire crackled in a stone hearth. And there, standing by the window with his back to them, was Jack, but not the Jack she knew. This man wore tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater that draped perfectly across broad shoulders. When he turned at their entrance, his face was clean-shaven, his hair expertly cut and styled. "Thank you, Victoria," he said, his voice the same deep timbre Ellie remembered, but somehow more confident, more at ease in these surroundings. "Would you give us some privacy, please?" The attorney nodded and retreated, closing the double doors behind her. For a long moment, Jack and Ellie simply stared at each other, the space between them filled with unspoken questions. "You're not homeless," Ellie finally stated, the words falling flat in the opulent room. Jack winced slightly. "No, I'm not. And my name is actually Jackson Donovan Ioi, though I wasn't lying about preferring Jack." Ellie's mind struggled to reconcile the man before her with the one who had sat at her counter drinking coffee from a chipped mug. "You lied to me." "I never explicitly said I was homeless," Jack countered gently. "But yes, I allowed you to believe something that wasn't true. And for that, I owe you an explanation." He gestured to a pair of leather armchairs near the fire, and after a moment's hesitation, Ellie sat, perching on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. Jack sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "3 years ago, I was exactly what you see now. Wealthy, successful, running the family investment firm, engaged to a woman from a similar background. I had everything society tells us we should want." He paused, his eyes distant. "And then my fiancée died in a boating accident that I survived." Ellie's anger faltered at the raw pain that flashed across his face. "I was destroyed," Jack continued quietly. "Not just by grief, but by guilt. I should have been able to save her. When I couldn't face the sympathetic looks anymore, I walked away from everything. This house, my company, my life. I grew my beard, wore old clothes, and just disappeared." "For 3 years?" Ellie asked incredulously. Jack shook his head. "For the first year, I traveled aimlessly. Then I started volunteering at homeless shelters, trying to find some purpose again. I lived simply, used only cash from an account nobody knew about. And 6 months ago, I ended up in your diner during a rainstorm." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You were kind to me when you thought I had nothing to offer in return. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? You saw me, not my appearance or my circumstances, but me." Ellie swallowed hard, processing his words. "So when you offered to pretend to be my husband, it wasn't entirely selfless," Jack admitted. "Being with you, helping you, it was the first time in years I felt like I mattered again." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "After the funeral, I realized I'd crossed a line. I was developing feelings for you, real ones, but our entire relationship was built on deception. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't, but I couldn't just tell you the truth in your grandmother's hospital room or at her funeral. So you disappeared instead," Ellie said flatly. "I needed time to figure out how to tell you everything," Jack replied. "And then Victoria informed me that they'd found your grandmother's will." Ellie frowned in confusion. "What does grandma's will have to do with any of this?" Jack hesitated. "Margaret changed her will shortly before she died. She left everything to you, of course, but with an unusual condition." He reached for a folder on the side table and handed it to Ellie. "She stipulated that her entire estate should be held in trust until the first anniversary of your marriage, at which point it would be released to both you and your husband jointly. Ellie's fingers trembled as she opened the folder and scanned the legal document inside. She believed we were really married, she whispered, the implications dawning on her. She changed her will because of our lie. Yes, Jack confirmed. When Victoria brought this to my attention, I knew I had to tell you everything. He leaned forward again, his expression earnest. Ellie, I never meant to complicate your life this way. I'll sign whatever documents are necessary to ensure you receive your inheritance without any claim from me. Ellie closed the folder, her mind reeling. How much are we talking about? Your grandmother was more financially savvy than you might have realized, Jack said carefully. Her late husband left her well provided for, and she made some excellent investment decisions over the years. The estate is valued at approximately $3 million. Ellie gasped, the folder slipping from her fingers. $3 million. But we lived so simply. She never spent money on herself. She was saving it for you, Jack said gently. For your bakery, I imagine. Victoria said she updated her will after you mentioned your dream to her. Tears welled in Ellie's eyes, both for the grandmother who had loved her so deeply and for the tangled mess their well-intentioned deception had created. This is insane, she murmured. I don't know what to think anymore. Jack rose from his chair, moving to kneel before her. Ellie, I'm so sorry for the position I put you in. But I need you to know that what started as pretense became very real for me. Getting to know you, seeing your strength and kindness, I found myself wishing our marriage wasn't just for show. Ellie looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of manipulation or deceit, but found only sincerity and a vulnerability that matched her own. I don't know you, she said simply. The Jack I thought I knew doesn't exist. He does, Jack insisted, taking her hands in his. The man who sat at your counter, who held you when you cried, who told you about his love of dogs and hatred of cilantro. That was the real me, more authentic than the version who ran this company and attended charity galas on autopilot. He squeezed her hands gently. I may have lied about my circumstances, but never about who I am at heart. Ellie withdrew her hands from his, standing up and walking to the window. Outside, the manicured grounds stretched toward a distant line of trees, a world away from her small apartment above the diner. I need time, she said finally, turning back to him. This is too much to process all at once. Jack nodded, rising to his feet. Of course. Take all the time you need. He moved to a desk in the corner, writing something on a slip of paper. This is my personal number. If you want to talk, call me. He handed her the paper, careful not to let their fingers touch. For what it's worth, I'm done hiding. Whatever happens between us, I'm returning to my life and my responsibilities, starting with a substantial donation to the homeless shelter on 8th Street. Despite everything, Ellie felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. That's a good place to start. As Victoria drove her home, Ellie sat in silence, turning the slip of paper over and over in her fingers. Her emotions swung wildly between anger at Jack's deception, confusion about her own feelings, and a persistent warmth when she remembered the tenderness in his eyes as he had slipped that simple silver band onto her finger, a ring she suddenly realized must have cost far more than the temporary placeholder he had claimed it to be. A week passed before Ellie finally worked up the courage to call the number Jack had given her. During that time, she had vacillated between never wanting to see him again and missing him with an intensity that took her breath away. In quiet moments at the diner, she found herself watching the door, half expecting him to appear in his worn coat and take his usual seat at the counter. When he answered on the second ring, his voice sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. Ellie, he said, her name a mixture of relief and question. I think we should talk, she said simply. They agreed to meet at a small park halfway between the diner and Donovan Estate, neutral ground where neither would have the home field advantage. When Ellie arrived, Jack was already there, sitting on a bench near the pond, feeding bits of bread to a gathering of ducks. He was dressed somewhere between the homeless man she had known and the wealthy businessman she had met at the estate. Jeans and a simple button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. The sight of him stirred something in her chest that she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. "I have questions," Ellie began without preamble. Jack nodded, tossing the last of the bread to an eager mallard. "I'll answer anything you ask, completely honestly. Why did you keep coming to the diner? Was it just for the free coffee?" A small smile touched his lips. "At first, yes. I was trying to live as simply as possible, and your kindness was unexpected. But I kept coming back because of you, because for those few minutes each day, you made me feel like a person worth talking to." Ellie considered this, watching the ripples spread across the pond's surface. "And the suit you wore to meet my grandmother?" "Mine," Jack admitted. "From before. I keep a few things in a storage unit. The ring." His expression softened. "My mother's. One of the few things I couldn't bear to leave behind when I walked away." Ellie touched her own finger where the ring had briefly rested. "It meant something to you then. Why give it to me for a pretense?" "Because by then, it wasn't entirely a pretense for me," Jack said quietly. "I was already falling for you, Ellie. I think I started falling that first day you defended me to Hank when he wanted to throw me out." Ellie remembered that day, how she had planted herself between Jack and the irritated cook, insisting that paying customers weren't the only ones who deserved basic human dignity. "If you were developing real feelings," she asked, turning to face him fully, "why disappear after the funeral?" Jack looked down at his hands. "Because I was ashamed, not just of lying to you, but of who I'd become, a man hiding from his responsibilities, his pain, his life. Meeting you, seeing how you faced your own grief with such grace, it made me realize I couldn't keep running." He met her eyes, his own filled with regret. "I should have found another way to tell you, but I was afraid you'd hate me once you knew the truth." "I don't hate you," Ellie said softly. "I'm angry and confused, but I don't hate you." Relief washed over his features. "That's more than I deserve." They sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks paddle across the pond, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. "What happens now?" Jack finally asked. "With your grandmother's will, I mean." Ellie had given this considerable thought over the past week. "I spoke with Victoria. She said we have options. We could contest the will, claiming the condition was based on false information. Or," she hesitated, "or," Jack prompted gently, "or we could actually get married." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Legally, at least, for a year, then divorce once the inheritance is released." Jack's expression was unreadable. "A marriage of convenience. It would be the simplest solution," Ellie reasoned, trying to keep her voice steady. "No lengthy legal battles, no contesting my grandmother's final wishes. And after the year is up, we just go our separate ways." Ellie shrugged, affecting a casualness she didn't feel. "We have to see where we stand then." Jack was quiet for so long that Ellie began to think he was going to refuse. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes intense. "I'll agree on one condition." "Which is?" "That we really try," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Not just going through the motions, but giving ourselves a chance to see if what I already feel for you, what I hope you might come to feel for me, could grow into something real and lasting." Ellie's heart hammered in her chest. "You want a real marriage." "I want the possibility of one," Jack corrected. "I want dates and conversations, and the chance to know you. The real you, not just the waitress who was kind to a stranger. And I want you to know the real me, not just the man in expensive clothes or the one in worn-out boots." The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Ellie had never imagined marrying someone under such circumstances, and yet there was something undeniably compelling about Jack's proposal, about Jack himself. "1 year," she said finally. We try for 1 year. If it doesn't work out, we part ways amicably with no hard feelings." Jack's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. 1 year, he agreed, extending his hand to seal their unusual bargain. As Ellie placed her hand in his, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or taking the first step towards something extraordinary. They were married 2 weeks later in a civil ceremony, much like the one they had fabricated for Margaret's benefit. Victoria served as witness, along with Hank from the diner, who had been skeptical of the arrangement until Jack had ordered and paid for enough food to feed 30 people at the homeless shelter. Ellie wore a simple cream-colored dress she had found in a vintage shop, and Jack wore a charcoal suit that made his eyes appear more blue than gray. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was gentle and brief, but it left Ellie's lips tingling and her mind racing with thoughts of what might come. They agreed that Ellie would move into the Donovan estate. It made more sense than Jack cramming himself into her tiny apartment, but she insisted on keeping her job at the diner, at least for now. "The bakery is still my dream," she explained as Jack helped her carry boxes of belongings into what would be their shared home. "I don't want to be dependent on your money or my grandmother's inheritance." Jack respected her decision, though he couldn't resist upgrading her ancient car to something more reliable for her daily commute. Their first real argument as a married couple was over this very gift, Ellie accusing him of trying to buy her affection, Jack insisting he was merely concerned for her safety. They resolved it over a dinner Jack cooked himself, both making concessions and learning the delicate dance of compromise that all successful relationships require. True to his word, Jack courted her as if they were dating rather than already legally bound. He took her to art galleries, remembering her love of painting. He surprised her with picnics in secluded spots on the estate grounds. He listened intently when she spoke of her day, her dreams, her memories of Margaret. Slowly, Ellie found herself falling for this complex man who contained multitudes, the sharp business acumen that